Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, today's video comes from Simple History, a channel favorite, and it's a great topic. It's called Why You Must Not Shoot Medics in War. So I'm interested to see what they say is kind of the reason why historically this has been a thing that has been often agreed upon. Because we've also seen in history that a lot of the rules of war, they get thrown out because you do whatever it takes to win. So I'm excited to see what they got here. All right, the original video is down below. Make sure you're supporting that video as well as Simple History. And I hope to see you around for future videos. All right, let's get started.
As a way to alleviate some of the horrors of combat, social convention and international law make some individuals on the battlefield off limits to deliberate targeting. Very often, however, in the heat of battle, these conventions are ignored, and those who should be off limits are intentionally targeted.
The most violent thing I've seen in
Rules
an
and
anime.
customs of war date back centuries. By the 18th century, the majority of the officer class in an army would be made up of the aristocracy, men of wealth and privilege. These individuals would often attempt to conduct war in a gentlemanly fashion. One of these involved the treatment of enemy officers in battle.
It's such a stupid thought. Gentlemanly war. Like, okay, no. When you get out there, sorry, that's like an ignorant notion of warfare, that there's such thing as that.
Deliberate shooting of officers was considered barbaric and to be avoided.
They actually thought that.
During the
like in American Revolution, the Americans would do that because it's, guerrilla warfare, and the British were appalled by that. And those are the ideas that you can have when you're like the British and you've had the historical context of being greater than every military and against every other place you've tried to colonize in the world. You can have that luxury. Right. But if someone else does it, not counting other war crime atrocities that a group might do, then it's like, no, that's bad form.
American Revolution. While it was never official policy to target officers, the Continental Army did create a unit of sharpshooters who made use of highly accurate long-range rifles, giving them the ability to pick specific targets as opposed to their regular Army counterparts who were armed with much less accurate smoothbore muskets.
Well, they believed that those soldiers the officers were so critical that the troops would be like blubbering idiots if not for their aristocratic commander up on their literal high horse.
Under the command of frontiersman Daniel Morgan, these rifles played a decisive role in the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. According to legend, one of his men, Timothy Murphy, under Morgan's orders, deliberately shot and killed British General Simon Fraser. Morgan's other men also targeted other officers and artillerymen, throwing the British advance into confusion.
It's like shows that, like, okay, it's like it shows, it's supposed to this idea that like they're just better people. You know what I mean? Again, because like of aristocratic classes, but it's okay to kill the peasants. Right, the peasants, the foot soldiers.
By the Continental Army to win the battle. Exactly what did happen is a bit vague, but Fraser and the other officers were definitely targeted by American sharpshooters, giving the Continental Army a decisive advantage. While there was never an official policy to target such individuals, those with the means to do so were more than willing to seek out officers for special attention, no matter how barbaric it may seem. Hey everyone, it's Chris Kane. Have you ever found yourself staring into the abyss of a blank wall, craving a hint of culture?
On Twitch,
Enter Displate, a mixture of 51% art, 46% tech wizardry, and a sprinkle of about 3% magic. And behold, it's metal, like literally metal. A veritable treasure trove of designs awaits you, from Star Wars to Marvel, all captured on this slice of industrial art. 20 seconds.
Check the original video.
Did I mention a tree gets planted? A real oxygen-producing tree. Purchase and plant in one fell swoop. % off. 3+ displates are neat. Over the years, restrictions on targets were formalized into official treaties. One of the most prominent of these restrictions is the prohibition of medics and medical personnel as legitimate targets. Some nations, however, not only refused to acknowledge these international guidelines, but also made the deliberate targeting of medics a standard tactic to be used by their armed forces. Two treaties that govern the conduct of soldiers on the battlefield are the Hague Convention and the Geneva Convention. The latter is a series of agreements dating back to 1864, which governed the conduct of soldiers on the battlefield. It was updated in 1906, 1929, and most recently in 1947.
It still gets violated all the time.
Though additions have been made and the exact wording of the treaty has changed over the years, any deliberate attack on a medic or medical personnel, or any unnecessary hindrance in the performance of their duties is considered a war crime and can be prosecuted accordingly.
Remember, the idea of what's a war crime will not matter to the desperates.
Furthermore, medics are not to be taken as prisoners of war. Should one be captured, he should be returned to friendly lines as soon as practical, and no distinction is to be made between military medical staff and civilians. Temporary auxiliary medical personnel, such as stretcher bearers and those who transported wounded or sick soldiers, are also considered non-combatants while performing their duties and given the same consideration as designated medics.
I didn't know that part.
Medics are allowed to carry weapons for personal protection or to defend the wounded under their care without forfeiting their status as a non-combatant.
Yeah, but I don't think the soldiers near that armed medic are going to think of it that way. They're going to be thinking about themselves first and probably don't want to deal with the threats that medic may shoot, right?
However, should the medic engage in offensive combat alongside other soldiers, he would forfeit his immunity and be treated like any other soldier. For the most part, during World War II, medics did not carry weapons, though there were some exceptions.
And that's why
to ensure these personnel
that animation right there is why medics often get killed.
are easily identified to ensure their protected status. Many nations would mark them with special symbols, most often a red cross on a white background. This symbol would be displayed on tents, vehicles, as well as helmets and armbands as a quick visual reminder of the special status of the bearer. During World War II, most major powers were signatories of the conventions, including the United States, Great Britain, and Germany. By and large, these nations respected medics and avoided deliberately shooting them while they tended to the wounded. There were some exceptions to this. For example, some SS units would intentionally wound enemy soldiers. When medical aid arrived on the scene to treat the casualty, the SS soldier would fire on the medic, hopefully killing him.
There's no way to enforce war crimes like that, whatever you agree to, unless it's like a post hoc thing after the fact, which people will do after the war. If you're the losing party, they're going to try to find every war crime possible to throw at you so they can throw the book at you and put down punishments to the maximum that they feel is allowable under justified international law.
There are also incidents of Allied soldiers firing on German medical personnel in clear and deliberate violations of the Hague and Geneva Conventions. While there are many examples of this happening on both sides, for the most part, the non-combatant status of the medics was respected on the Western Front. Medics would often tend to soldiers of either side. In one example, a pair of American medics used a French church as an aid station on D-Day, 1944.
By the way, I had a thought here. We'll get to this story, but you know, like this idea of combatants, what do you think that there should be, like, should we consider, let's say, like drafted soldiers, right? So soldiers who did not volunteer, they got drafted into the military to do that. I mean, obviously they're going to be seen as combatants, right? But there weren't people there necessarily because they wanted to. I mean, they're going to be there because, I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but nevertheless, they're there. Should they be viewed the same as like medics? Of course, if that happened, you wouldn't even have a war, right? Because of that. But what needs to be the definition of a non-combatant, right? Is it somebody that doesn't matter the reason they're there, but they do have offensive capabilities, or what? Where do you draw these lines?
Wounded soldiers from both sides were given the same treatment. The only restriction was that all patients had to leave their weapons outside. Both American and German soldiers' lives were saved due to their intervention.
Yay.
On the Eastern Front, the situation was entirely different. The Soviet Union did not sign the Geneva Convention, and the Hague Conventions were signed by Russia in 1899. And
some countries just they're not going to care. They're going to blatantly just be like, no, We'll make our own rules. You're not going to make our rules for us. Yeah, and you saw the atrocious things in the wars, especially the world wars on the Eastern Front and World War I and World War II that would appall people, right? Regardless of side of the war, out in the West, if they saw so much of that.
In 1907, with the Soviet Union never confirming its status as signatory, which provided the justification for Nazi mistreatment of both prisoners and medical staff. When in combat, medics would be treated like any other soldier and would be eliminated without hesitation. Should a Soviet medic be captured, he would be sent to a POW camp as any other soldier. Conditions in these camps were horrendous, with the Nazi regime deliberately underfeeding Soviet POWs. The main aims of the German war effort in the Eastern Theater of the War was Lebensraum, or living space for ethnic Germans. As a result,
that was nothing but war crimes going on there on both sides of Poland.
Treating the Soviets, be they medic, prisoner, or any other protected class, with utter contempt flew in the face of the Nazi ideology. In response, Soviet soldiers also didn't respect German medics or medical personnel. The war on the Eastern Front was one of untold brutality, with both sides committing atrocities against the other with no regard for international law. Across the globe in the Pacific theater of the war,
especially in that case where if it's like the Soviet Union, they're on the side and technically fighting the same enemy, right, as Western allies. So Western allies are going to turn a blind eye to that, because the enemy of your enemy is your friend, right? So is there irony, right?
Another military would make the killing of medics a priority. As the United States and other allied powers conducted their island-hopping campaign, it was soon apparent that the non-combatant status afforded to those in medical fields was not applicable. Although the Empire of Japan did sign the Hague Convention in 1907, and it also signed the Geneva Convention of 1929, but it didn't ratify it. Japanese leadership believed that upholding the treaty would encourage the Americans to bomb Japanese cities, as any captured airmen would be treated as legitimate POWs rather than war criminals.
That brings into question too, if two enemies are at war with each other and one breaks the war crimes, right? War crimes deals. Does that then give justification for the other country to commit their own war crimes? Because you see that happen as an excuse a lot. Well, they did it, so we can do it.
Which was what the Japanese...
And then if that happens, will both nations be held accountable after? Does that happen? Not really, I can think of.
Considered them to be.
Let me know if you got
As a result, the provisions of the conventions were ignored. While on campaign, many medics found themselves the subject of special attention from their Japanese foes. The red cross on a white background that was worn on both helmets and armbands, symbols that in other theaters provided a degree of protection, did little more than single out the wearer as the subject of special attention. Medics and corpsmen would remove these insignia and wear the same uniforms as their comrades, as any feature that distinguished them as medical personnel would only put their lives in unnecessary risk. Additionally, medics and corpsmen in the Pacific Theater would routinely carry weapons and fight alongside their comrades. Though it was a direct violation of the Geneva Convention, there was little point in following its rules, as the enemy didn't respect the convention anyway.
Now, when your life's on the line and you're in there, soldiers don't care. They don't care. They're there for their lives. It's the people that, supply things that are used, I guess, for, or giving out orders, either supplying the stuff or giving out the orders for things that would be considered war crimes. They're the ones that, I don't want to say just have the accountability, but like the ones really in charge of it.
Army medic and Medal of Honor recipient Desmond Doss noted the Japanese obsession for attacking medical personnel. In one interview after the war, he stated, quote, "To them, the most hated men in our army were the medics. They would let anybody get by just to pick us off. They were taught to kill the medics for the reason that it broke down the morale of the men, because if the medic was gone, they had no one to take care of them. All the medics were armed, except me," end quote. As Doss states, the main reason for targeting medics was to harm American morale. Should a soldier be wounded, it should be the actions of a medic that would be the difference between life and death. Should the medic be killed or otherwise incapacitated, there would be no immediate aid for any other wounded soldier. For centuries, the designation of legitimate and illegitimate targets has been enforced both as a social convention and in formal treaties. In spite of this, many have simply ignored these restrictions in order to gain an advantage on the battlefield.
All right, another great video by Simple History. It's bringing the question I want to ask you right now, and put this in the comments. How important do you think war crime laws are? And regardless, I guess, if they're actually upheld, how is it important to have those? Do you think, like, as something that people sign, or at least are pressured to sign, whether they sign them or not? What do you think about that role? Should they exist? Should they not exist? Should they just exist based on moral principles or whatever? What do you think about them? Also, what do you think about their effectiveness? Do you think they have any effect at all? Do they have a little bit of an effect? If you can cite anything historically with that, that would be great, to get a conversation going. So you heard my thoughts along the way, but I do want to hear from you all. All right. Good job again by Simple History. This video again is linked down below. Make sure you give that the view as well. Sub to their videos, check them out. And I've covered a lot of their videos too and given a lot of input. So if you want to look for more of those, just search for me and search for Simple History, and you're going to find all you can watch. All right. We'll see y'all next time.